Hi everybody, and thanks for joining me again. This is our build of Tamiya's 1/24 scale Mitsubishi Lancer Evo 7 from 2002 Monte Carlo rally driven by Delacour and Grataloop. We're starting off in this video with the chassis, the underside of the car at least, and the transmission suspension unit. So we're starting off obviously with the floor pan, which is just going to be painted overall white, gloss white. Going to do that off camera and cutting out the main parts that we're going to need for this stage of the assembly, so mainly the exhaust, the prop shaft differentials and all the suspension units, including the subframes. It's interesting that Tamiya have us build the exhaust system. It comes in 3 parts, but they have you build it through the rear subframe. But I worked out that you could actually build the exhaust and just thread it through the subframe at a later stage, so that just helps with painting. So we've done the painting now. It's just titanium gold and just doing a bit of detail painting on the it's a central, not a gearbox, but just a bearing really for the centre of the prop shaft. That's in titanium silver. The actual diff at the rear is in aluminium. I sprayed that again off camera a bit later on. So that's ready. Just a note about brushes. I know that quite often we chuck these brushes around, but I really do look after these ones. The Winsor & Newton Sable, a zero brush like that is probably costing around £10 or £11 sterling in the UK at the minute. So they're worth looking after, but I find that they're well worth the money. They do last if you look after them properly. So just going on to the uprights now. They've been previously sprayed in blue-red for the rear uprights, and my own mix of, Tamiya calls out bronze, but I made my own mix up for the front uprights. We're doing quite a lot of detail painting on these uprights. You might think that actually you can't see a lot of these once they're installed in the car, but I find it's probably worth doing this. The trouble is that there's so many colours that you've got to use. I think there are 4 or 5 different colours on these parts, on each individual part. So it's quite a lot of swapping and changing between different paints. I'm using Tamiya's new range of lacquer paints, which is my go-to paint now for brush painting. They're just perfect, ready mixed for brush painting. They're not too thick, good coverage that you get with them, and because they're a lacquer-based paint, the brush marks do tend to even out. So they're fairly self-leveling, and I actually use a bit of Tamiya lacquer thinner, self-leveling lacquer thinner, to get an even better result. So they're really good, particularly for metallics. I know a lot of acrylic metallics do tend to be a little bit grainy, and they're very difficult to brush paint. So these are great for these sort of details, which would be probably far too difficult to mask off and spray. It'd be far too tedious. I just wouldn't have the patience to do that. Well, some would say you need plenty of patience to brush paint all these different bits, but I think it's the happy medium really. So we're going on to some, I think this is titanium gold. Just painting in the mounts for the rear steady braces there. And now onto the actual shock absorbers within the coil spring unit. You can see the paint goes on really, really well. titanium gold's a great colour, and combined with the titanium silver, they both have a goldish hue to them, but they do look quite different, do contrast with each other nicely on a part like this. So I find it's well worth doing. It's quite an unusual rear suspension on this car with the different colours, one side and the other, the red and blue. It does add a bit of interest to the underside of the car. This is one of my most hated parts of building model cars, which is painting in the coil springs. Again, I'm doing this with Tamiya's lacquer paint. This is the semi-gloss black LP5, I think it is. One of the things, just a bit of a tip, is not to try and run the brush like that along the spring, because the hairs sometimes tend to slip down the side and you end up with a mess down the side. It's much easier and much neater to use the brush sort of a chisel edged on, so that you actually like that, so that you're just edging the paint along the side and you get a natural straight line doing it that way. Sometimes it's just a bit awkward to get in to do it like that, but with a bit of touch up here and there, it's and as I say, a bit of time and patience, it's fairly easy to get a decent result like that. A lot of the actual coil spring is buried up in the chassis of the car. Just finishing off these uprights with there's a red band around the lower mount for the coil spring on both units on the rear suspension. So just coming up to finishing these off now. The main colour blue is I think it's a Mr. Hobby gloss blue, and the red is a Tamiya, one of Tamiya's new lacquer colours, Shine Red I think it is. So just masking off the rear wishbones, I'm just taking that masking off now. It's previously been just painted in with some titanium silver, and now doing just a bit of detail painting on the actual wishbone mounts. This one's titanium gold at the rear end, and I think the front end is titanium silver again. I've previously done a bit of matte black detailing on what I assume are rubber bushes at the front end of the wishbones. So that's coming up to finishing the wishbone units. One thing to notice is, again, just going back to looking after paintbrushes, is not to get the paint right up to the ferrule. They're very difficult to clean once the paint gets right up into the ferrule. It tends to clog the brush and they're very difficult to get completely free of paint again. So you'll notice that I'm just using the tip of the brush in the paint and not letting the paint flood the actual hairs of the brush. So I really do look after them. I've had them for probably 3 years now, and they're as good as the day I bought them. So that money spent on them is well worth the expense, in my opinion. So just setting out the parts now ready for assembly, with the engine block there, which has been painted in the mix of bronze that I made up with a bit of matte black detailing on it. And that's the first thing that we're going to fit here. But first of all, it needs the half shafts fitting into the engine. So there they are, they've been previously painted up. there's 3 colours on that half shaft, so you know it's there's quite a bit of work goes into these cars, particularly on the detail painting side. You spend an awful lot of time. The actual construction is relatively short. It's the painting and constantly changing between different colours and refilling airbrushes and so on. That's what takes the time with them, I find. So just pop the engine in. It's a nice secure fit. Just make sure it goes in the right way. And this is where we come to fitting the exhaust. So I'm not cementing it at this point, I'm just laying it into position, because as you can see, this first part of the subframe, which comes in 4 different bits, needs to thread through. The exhaust actually weaves its way through the subframe. As I said, Tamiya have you cement the front half of the exhaust in, and then the middle part of the exhaust goes through the subframe, but I thought that was just overcomplicated. And with a bit of fiddling, it's relatively straightforward to get this subframe in position. One thing that I did find with it was that it was springing out at the back. The location was a bit loose at the back, and just a bit of pressure from the exhaust was pushing the unit back out, so that needed clamping while I got on with the rest of the assembly. So there's 2 more elements to the rear subframe. These have been all sprayed in Tamiya titanium silver. You can see that this side actually encloses the exhaust, so you can see why you just need to take a bit of care. Got a bit of excess glue on there, but if you're quick, it's relatively easy to just scrape that off with a toothpick if you need to. So while the rear's setting up there, I'm just going to move on to the front suspension, starting off with the front subframe and integral front wishbones. It's a nice secure fit for this part. The very deep pegs going into the floor pan. I'm just coming on to assembling the uprights now that we've carefully painted. And first of all, we just need to assemble the brake discs. I've sprayed those with Tamiya's lacquer gunmetal, and I did mask them off with some discs cut out with a circle cutter to mask off the discs themselves while I painted the central part of the discs, and hand painted the calipers in metallic grey. So I use super glue for the discs because I find that the pressure of putting the wheels in, and if I do need to take the wheels off, often just using polystyrene cement, it pulls the disc off. So super glue is a much better option, I find, with brake discs. And although Tamiya do key the parts in the hope that you don't get the discs on the wrong way, it is still possible to assemble them upside down. So just a careful check with the instructions to make sure that the caliper ends up in the right position. It's well worth just checking before finally committing to the assembly. And of course, using super glue, just be careful not to get the glue into the area where the polycap is. That's for those of us that want our car wheels to turn. So just popping in the front uprights now. They obviously don't glue in, they need to rotate. Again, for those of us that like to play with our model cars and have them steer. Only joking, these go in a case never to be touched again once they're done. So in with the steering arm, which just clicks into place. I made that look easy on that shot, but it's very edited, believe me. It took me quite a few goes to get that done. Now the rear differential and prop shaft going in. So just 2 location points again with super glue, and the rear uprights just dropping into position. They can be glued obviously because they are rigid units. And again, making sure that you get the right one. It isn't actually possible to put these on the wrong way. The Tamiya do key the location points so that you can't assemble them the wrong way around. And on with the lower wishbone units, which just locate in 2 areas. Just hold that down for a second while the glue takes effect. Last bit of detail now, there are some steady braces at the back of the rear uprights. It's just pop into place. Oops, bit of finger trouble there. But eventually it pops in. And finally, we just need to drop in these. I'm just wondering whether or not they're actually trying to illustrate the roll bar assembly. I don't actually know what those units are for. So that's the underside complete. It's a pretty good result. I'm pleased with that. In the next one, we're going to be building the complete interior. That work has already been done. We're just waiting for video editing, which will be done in the next couple of days. So if you want to pick up that and the playlist for this build, you can do that by subscribing to the channel. I do appreciate your support in doing that. And you'll be notified instantly when those videos and playlists are published. So that's it for this one. I appreciate you joining me and hope you enjoyed the video. And we'll see you next time for the interior. Bye bye for now.